I've been enjoying meditating with the Waking Up app recently. It makes me think about the origins of cognition and consciousness. So let me ask, where do thoughts come from?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. Subjectively, they appear to come from nowhere, right? I mean, it's just they come out of some kind of mystery that is at our backs subjectively, right? So, which is to say that if you pay attention to the nature of your mind in this moment, you realize that you don't know what you're going to think next, right? Now, you're expecting to think something that seems like you authored it, right? You're not, unless you're schizophrenic or you have some kind of thought disorder where your thoughts seem fundamentally foreign to you. They do have a kind of signature of selfhood associated with them, uh, and people readily identify with them. They feel like what you are. I mean, this is the thing. This is the spell that gets broken with meditation. I mean, our default state is to feel identical to the stream of thought, right? Which is fairly paradoxical because how could you, as a mind, as a self, if there were such a thing as a self, how could you be identical to the next piece of language or the next image that just springs into conscious view? But and meditation is ultimately about examining that point of view closely enough so as to unravel it and feel the freedom that's on the other side of that identification. But the subjectively thoughts simply emerge, right? And you don't think them before you think them, right? There's this first moment where, I mean, just anyone listening to us or watching us now could perform this experiment for themselves. I mean, just imagine something or remember something. Just pick a memory, any memory, right? You've got a storehouse of memory. Just promote one to consciousness. Did you pick that memory? I mean, let's say you remembered breakfast yesterday, or you remembered what you said to your spouse before leaving the house, or you remembered what you watched on Netflix last night, or you remembered something that happened to you when you're 4 years old, whatever it is, right? It first it wasn't there, and then it appeared, and that is not I mean, well, I'm sure we'll get to the topic of free will ultimately. That's not evidence of free will, right? I mean,
Why are you so sure, by the way? It's very
well,
interesting.
through no free will of my own, yeah. Um, Everything just appears, right? I mean, what else could it do? And so that's the subjective side of it. Objectively, we have every reason to believe that many of our thoughts, all of our thoughts, are uh, at bottom what some part of our brain is doing neurophysiologically. I mean, that these are the products of some kind of neural computation and neural representation when you're talking about memories.
Is it possible to pull at the string of thoughts to try to get to its root, to try to dig in past the obvious surface subjective experience of like the thoughts pop out of nowhere? Is it possible to somehow get closer to the roots of where they come out of from the firing of the cells? Or is it a useless pursuit to dig into that direction?
Well, you can get closer to many, many subtle contents in consciousness, right? So you can notice things more and more clearly and have a landscape of mind open up and become more differentiated and more interesting. And if you take psychedelics, it opens up, wide, depending on what you've taken and the dose, it opens in directions and to an extent that, very few people imagine would be possible, but for having had those experiences. But this idea of you getting closer to something, to the datum of your mind, or to something of interest in there, or something that's more real, is is ultimately undermined because there's no place from which you're getting closer to it. There's no your part of that journey, right? Like we tend to start out, whether it's in meditation or in any kind of self examination or taking psychedelics, we start out with this default point of view of uh, feeling like we're the kind of on the rider on the horse of consciousness, or we're the man in the boat going down the stream of consciousness, right? But we're differentiated from what we know cognitively, introspectively. But that feeling of being differentiated, that feeling of being a self that can strategically pay attention to some contents of consciousness, is what it's like to be identified with some part of the stream of thought that's going uninspected, right? Like that it's a false point of view. And when you see that and cut through that, then this sense of this notion of going deeper kind of breaks apart, because really there is no depth. Ultimately, everything is right on the surface. Everything there's no center to consciousness. There's just consciousness and its contents, and that those contents can change vastly. Again, if you drop acid, the contents change, but there's, in some sense, that doesn't represent a position of depth versus the continuum of depth versus surface has broken apart.